Mr. Bibber, what are the chances for North Macedonia this June to be granted start of accession negotiations with the European Union?
Well, it's possible, but it's going to be quite challenging. And I think challenging mostly because some EU member states, in particular France and some others, Netherlands, Denmark, are skeptical to give the green light for the beginning of talks. A lot of it has to do actually with domestic politics in the countries. So fear that the kind of Euroscepticism in the countries and populist waves would challenge the government. So they're unwilling to do anything which is going to question the kind of Eurosceptics in their own constituency. So it has a lot less to do with North Macedonia and a lot more to do with domestic French and Dutch politics.
You mentioned challenging. From your perspective, what is bigger challenge? Hesitation of some member states, you mentioned France, Netherlands and Denmark, or the very narrow window for the German Bundestag to analyze the annual European Commission report on Macedonia and possibly give green light for accession talks?
Well, I think there are a couple of these obstacles. As you mentioned, the short time span for the Bundestag could be an issue, but I would expect that if especially North Macedonia does everything right over the next months in terms of reforms and there are no obstacles emerging, that I would expect a very clear message from the European Commission. And that would, of course, help also the Bundestag to take a decision. And I would expect that, especially when it comes to North Macedonia, that the Bundestag is not going to have major reservations. So even though it's a narrow window of opportunity, I would be surprised if that would be the main obstacle at the end of the day.
And what about the hesitation on part of France and Netherlands?
I think that's a much bigger issue, and especially one because it's not in a certain way rational. It is based on an irrational fear of domestic politics reflected in the protests of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France, for example. So I found in France a lot of reservation on any symbolic level to seem to promote enlargement at the moment. It's very little to do with the countries. So I would expect that that depends a lot on the outcome of the European Parliament elections. Will especially Macron be encouraged, or will he feel in a certain way have to be even more reserved and slower on the process because of high opposition? And the same in the other countries like the Netherlands. And there we've seen the rise of new populist actors and recent local elections. So that will depend a lot on the outcome of elections in May, whether or not the countries or their leaders will find courage to send the right signal for North Macedonia.
So this brings me right to my next question. What is the main determining point for France's decision? The outcome of the European elections, as you said, or the homework done in Macedonia on part of the reform agenda?
Well, I think the main causes are indeed domestic politics in France, the outcome of the European Parliament election. Now, of course, it does matter what happens here. If the government does its homework, if it results in a positive, clear recommendation by the Commission and in a certain way showing that it's really made progress and also that it's determined to do progress domestically and not just in resolving bilateral issues, then of course it will be harder for France to block it. So of course France has to also justify its blockage if it decides to do that, and if the government makes mistakes, it makes it easier for the government of France to find excuses. So in that sense, the primary mover is domestic politics in France, but it doesn't mean that the government in North Macedonia should lean back and say, well, it's out of our hands. On the contrary, it can shape the outcome and either send a positive signal, which will also give the other member states the push to kind of corner France, so to speak, and really try to become more compromising on the matter, or give an excuse.
If you were in a position to be the Prime Minister of North Macedonia, what would be your agenda starting from now until June summit of European Union?
Well, I mean, in a certain way, the main challenge would be to push a government to really engage in its reforms and take them seriously, and make sure, monitor and make sure that there's dealing with rule of law, dealing with corruption cases, that they're engaging in reform. I mean, there's a clear consensus in terms of the population of North Macedonia that they want EU membership. So campaigning against the EU and campaigning on issues such as the done name agreement is certainly not very helpful and doesn't help to a certain way move the debate forward. I think there's a popular consensus that Euro-Atlantic integration is the goal of this country. So I think one has to think about what are the key points to get this agenda moving forward, which is dealing with corruption and clientelism, which of course is not a one-day reform, strengthening the rule of law. And I think these are priorities which, I mean, both government and hopefully the opposition would take seriously.
Thank you very much.